this.
Right.
Woohoo.
You can pause the recording too. Just hit pause.
Oh, really? Oh,
And then
yeah. Karen will have to trim this video anyway before she publishes. It's
Okay. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Not me.
You can?
Oh, no, just your face. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. I think it has to. I got to give it permission. Let me see this technology. I'm on a Mac now, so I'm having to learn how to do all this fancy stuff.
Mhm.
Okay, hold on just a sec.
Well, I've been doing Mac support.
Okay, yeah,
since,
just bear with me.
I think it's 86 or 87. I started doing Mac support for colleagues.
84 for us, the computer for the rest of us. You know, the
Oh, yeah.
1984.
Oh man, you can still watch it on YouTube. You know that.
One of the all-time great commercials.
And it only aired once
Mm.
at the Super Bowl halftime show in '84.
Wow.
And it's like a legendary one.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me hopefully try again and see if this works. Yeah, I think it's gonna work.
There you are. So let
Can you
me.
see can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. Technology, gotta love it.
You need to allow me to. I think you need to give me permission. Don't press deny, please.
What is
Because
this? System elect- So
I
I
would
don't know,
suggest you.
why am I getting this?
I don't know. Maybe it's security kind of thing that that somebody's trying to record your screen. You have to give your permission.
Yeah, I just did that, so I don't know
Oh, you did?
why. I did that in my system preferences. This right here, see, I
you
let
did?
Zoom.
Oh, there it is. Okay, thank you so much.
So
Then
there we go. So I
was
think we're
probably
fine now.
probably a redundant error message then.
Yeah. Can you
So-
guys see this? Can you see the notes
Yes.
pages rather?
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I like the Mac because you can have like 21 screens you can toggle through. I just love that feature. Anyway, we're going to get started today. I'm the co-manager of the Adobe Users Group, been part of the group for what, 15, 20 years. I don't keep track anymore. But I've been doing presentations for ever since the group started back in the day. We're still around. Today, we're going to be covering mask in Illustrator. Now, we talked about mask in Photoshop before. We're going to be talking about mask in Illustrator. Now, I've done this in the past, but I kind of rushed through it. What I'm doing now in part 4 of this series is taking my time to go over theory first, and then responsive, and then applications. Okay, so theory, while it's not fun, it's one of those necessary evils I refer to it as. Okay, so we're going to talk about theory first, and then we're going to do some applications, some real world application on mask. Because if you can understand the why behind things, the theory, if you will, the application becomes a lot easier to do when you need to do something, And so with that in mind, let me toggle over to my notes here, and I'm gonna go over this rather quickly, and then I'm gonna kind of highlight it as we go through the various examples that we're gonna be covering. Now, in Photoshop, as we've heard, as you may have heard me say in the past, has 8 different types of masks that you can use, okay? There's the layer mask, there's a vector mask, there's an alpha channel mask, there's a clipping mask, there's a gradient mask, there's an alpha adjustment layer mask, there's a filter mask. So there's 8 different types of masks in Photoshop. Now in Illustrator, there's only 2. That's the clipping mask and the opacity mask. Now the opacity mask is akin to the layer mask in Photoshop. So if you want to kind of compare the two together, if you will, the opacity mask rather, is it's kind of like the layer mask. And then the clipping mask is similar to the clipping mask in Photoshop. Okay, so with that in mind, let's talk about the difference between the two. We're going to talk about, and then the commonality between all kind of masks, in fact, whether it be Photoshop, whether it be Illustrator, or any electronic or physical mask, but whether this be a face mask, a gas mask, masking tape, you name it, any kind of mask, regardless of its type, can only do one of three things. You guys have heard me say this. You should know this by now, right? It can only show, hide, or protect what's underneath it. Keyword there is what's underneath it, right? So the mask always goes on top. When you think of a mask that goes on your face, you know, from Louisiana, we have Mardi Gras. How many of you have heard of Mardi Gras, right? They wear these masks on their face during this parade time, right? Well, that mask can show, hide, or protect what's underneath it, right? Any kind of mask in the universe, whether it's Photoshop, Illustrator, mask that you put on your face, helmet mask, gas mask, you name it, can only show, hide, or protect what's underneath it. Now, all masks create non-destructive content. They don't destroy the content underneath it. It just shows, hide, or protect the content underneath the mask. So you're not destroying content, which is the power of masking, in fact, is that it doesn't destroy the content. When you're new to Photoshop or Illustrator, you have a tendency to cut stuff away and just throw stuff away. That's not a good thing. You should never destroy your original content. Classical example I give of that is, if you got some wedding pictures, you don't want to be cutting up the wedding pictures and throwing stuff away and then realize I needed it for something else, right? You want to always preserve your original content. Well, mask, regardless of its type, will allow you to do that. It will create non-destructive content. The mask always goes on top of the object it's being masked, okay? It's always on top. Now, sometimes it's hard to see that, but typically it's always on top of the object that's being masked. And only what's under the mask gets affected. Now, the golden rule of masking, and you've heard me say this 1,000 times before, is that black conceals and white reveals, right? Black conceals or hide pixels, making them transparent. We'll see that, okay? And white reveals or shows pixel, making them opaque or visible on the canvas, if you will. If you can keep those two thoughts in mind, you can understand how to use masks. A lot of times I've heard in the past, you know, black conceals, white reveals. And I'm thinking, what does it conceal or what does it reveal? Well, sometimes it shows hide pixels. Sometimes it shows hide selection. Sometimes it shows a hide effects. Sometimes it shows a hide the filter. So what does it conceal and what does it reveal is if you can master that, you can unlock the mystery of the mask. In fact, I got a training on putting it together to that end. Okay, so if you keep these two concepts, the golden rules of masking, you can go a long way when working with any kind of mask, regardless of the type in Photoshop or in Illustrator. Now, clipping mask is the one type of mask. It's fairly easy to use in Illustrator. It's important to note that when you create a clipping mask, it will remove the fill and the stroke. We'll see that in our first example of using our clipping mask. It's going to remove both the fill and the stroke. However, you can add them back, and we'll show you how to do that if time permits, back to your content if you need to. So it has a dual function. You can mask and then you can do the fill as well. And we'll see that in one of our exercises. Now, you can also move the content or you can move the mask. We will see some examples of, if you think of a face mask again, you can either move the mask around up above the face, or you can move your face, right? Y'all like that example there? So you can either move the mask or move its content, either one or the other, or if you lock them together, you can move both. So if it's tied to my face and that little strap that goes to the back, it can move the mask and its content together. Okay, that's just a little prop there for you. Okay, by the way, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to chime in. I like to make my training interactive. Sometimes I feel like if I don't get anybody chiming in every now and then, I'm gonna talk a hole in your head. I typically don't want to do that, but I may. So chime in if you do have questions and we can address them accordingly. Now, clipping mask, it can also be created via a draw inside. Okay, there's 3 different ways of drawing in Illustrator. There's a normal draw. There's a draw behind, which, as the name implies, allows you to draw what? Behind the object. And there's the draw inside, which, as the name implies, allows you to draw inside of the object. And we'll see an example of that as well. And then the second, but a clipping mask via draw inside is just another version of a clipping mask, the first mask that we're going to be talking about. Now, the opacity mask is like a layer mask in Photoshop. And there's 2 ways to add a mask to a content. You can either make the mask and add it to the object, or you can cut and paste it inside of the mask. We'll see, we may look at both of those ways tonight as well. And then there's this thing, and this is real tricky. I hadn't seen any video. I've looked at a lot of videos on YouTube. How many of you like YouTube? On Illustrator. And there's an option in when you're dealing with a opacity mask that allows you to check this clip checkbox that allows you to clip the content of the mask. And we'll see an example of that as we move forward. Now, what's the difference between a clipping mask and opacity mask? When to use one or the other, right? Well, a clipping mask works from the shape of the mask. Keyword there, in order to have it in all caps and in bold, it deals with the shape of the mask that defines what's going to be masked. Okay, you guys tracking me? In fact, the color of the mask doesn't even matter. It's the shape that affects what's going to be masked. Now, as opacity masks work with the color. Now, when I say color, I'm typically talking about black, white, or typically shades of gray that defines what's going to get masked. In opacity mask, the mask may or may not matter, the shape rather, may or may not matter on the size of the mask. Again, it depends upon whether or not that you have that clip option selected. And again, we'll see an example of that in just a bit. So I just want to kind of get, some quick, what I call executive summary for you executives out there. I know we got some executives out in the room, right? So with that in mind, let's go to Illustrator. Can you guys see this Adobe Illustrator screen?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Good. So I prep, because it's always good to prep for your class, right? 3 examples that we're going to be talking about. Again, this is still theory before we get into some practical applications of doing this. So we're going to talk about the 2 ways of creating a clipping mask, right? The normal way, and then the way the clipping mask via draw inside. So those are the 2 ways we're going to be looking at. And then we're going to be looking at the opacity mask. So with that in mind, let's look at this first option. And let me open up let me move this out of my way, put it over on this side. Okay, so if you guys can see my layer panel, okay, and I broke these down into 3 different layers so we can get to them readily. So what I have here basically is, let me just move it over so you can see it. I have just this rectangle, blue rectangle with a